Hello, it's me, Susan Flory, with The Big Middle. It's another fascinating foray for you into the world of healthy longevity. I'm calling this episode Taking Your Shot. That is what my guest Tina Wood said to me 2 years ago when we sat down in her garden in southwest London. I'd asked her about her motivation and her determination in her 50s, in her early 50s, to actually get herself out there, to change direction. She's a serial social entrepreneur, CEO of Longevity International, Collider Health and Collider Science, and there are a few more hats, woman of many hats. She had just helped launch the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity, the APPG heretofore for longevity here in the UK. Her book is Live Longer with AI, How Artificial Intelligence is Helping Us Extend Our Health Spans and Live Better Too, deemed essential to all the workforce of the National Health Service. It's actually given out for free. Tina Wood's fantastic to catch up with you.
Great to be here, Susan, and thank you so much. I can't believe it's been 2 years since we last did an episode for The Big Middle, and certainly there's been a lot that's happened.
I know. I wish we were in your garden in southwest London, but of course, that's not for another couple of months, so we'll have to meet there and raise a glass to getting out of lockdown, phase 3, and hope it's as irreversible as the government hopes, right?
Absolutely. Let's hope it's going to be smooth sailing from now on. Let's hope so.
Can't wait to get a haircut. Oh, my word.
I can't wait to get my hair lightened because it's looking a bit dark at the moment, but there you go.
You look gorgeous, and it works for Madonna, so it's all right. Anyway, you have taken your shot, Tina Woods, and scored many times over in recent years. Now, we met because we share the drive for true systems change, structural, cultural reforms to make it easier for everyone of whatever age, rich or poor, to live healthier for longer. Before we get into your book and the latest developments with the APPG for longevity, tell me why you decided to switch things up. It was your early 50s and you said, okay, I've done this and now this is going to be my future.
So first of all, just before I sort of go on about my own sort of journey, I mean, first of all, I just wanted to say I admire all the work, Susan, that you do to kind of show that, there's enormous sort of incredible things that people can do in their 50s. I mean, a lot of people still think that once you hit 50, it's sort of like the beginning of the end, which of course is absolute rubbish. And I think it's for me, and I know this is a lot of the message that you share with your podcast and your viewers. There's an enormity of opportunity and excitement ahead. Once you hit your 50s. I mean, it's a new phase in our life. For many of us, we've kind of done the bit around sort of raising the kids, and we can really, really sort of look at things in a sort of different way.
Thank you so much, Tina. I really appreciate that. And of course, I've broadened it out because now I'm doing a lot more health issues. I mean, listeners, subscribers to The Big Middle have been asking for it. So that has been good because, as you know, the parallel pandemic that's going on is cardiometabolic illness, the disease that is running alongside COVID. So I've been focusing a lot on that. Just to take you back then, share some personal details about your mindset then. Obviously, you did not impose limits on yourself, but you also knew, you said to me, there comes a time when you must take your shot.
Yes, and that was essentially what I decided to do. I sort of hit this phase where my youngest child was just about to think about applying to universities. The financial stresses were becoming a little bit less because they were all in private school. I've got 3 sons, and I knew I wanted to do something different. And it was sort of I've always been quite entrepreneurial, and I've throughout my whole sort of professional life up until then. I ran my own agency for about 14 years. I set up ventures for other companies. So I've always had that entrepreneurial bent, but I decided that I really wanted to sort of set up a completely new type of organization, really aligned around what I was personally really interested in, which was about system change. It was, and I had in my idea that ecosystems and actually looking at who you need to bring together to really drive that sort of systemic change, that real change in thinking, but also action around health and moving away from this sort of sick care model. And I had been very, very involved in that whole kind of sick care paradigm. And for many years, I was working with the pharmaceutical industry, and And I just felt there is so much that needed to be done, especially with technology and, of course, with our growing aging demographic. And, there's so much science out there to help us understand how we can keep healthy and well.
Let's just look at how you then started to, we can all think those thoughts, and a lot of us then have inertia, or we just can't manage to make it all happen. So was it your idea, the APPG for longevity?
So the APPG came later. So that was about 3 years after I started Collider Health. So Collider Health, I started in 2017. So it's been almost 4 years. So I started that business, and it was very much around social responsible projects. I wanted to drive positive change, positive impact. And so, of course, when you start up your own business, you always think, oh, where are my first contracts? Where are my first clients going to be? So there's about sort of 6 months or so when I sort of was working out where my business would come from. And so I had a kind of an idea in my mind, in terms of ecosystem building, getting people together to drive the change. But what would that look like? So my first project, funnily enough, was a project in yoga and helping someone set up a social enterprise called Yoga and Healthcare Alliance, and it was and what my client was trying to do was to show the growing medical evidence base around yoga. So that was my first client. It's interestingly, so you always.
And this is for your consultancy, Collider Health.
This is the consultancy business. So you have to start small and you have to build from there. So that was my first project. But very interestingly, in that first project, I remember I was looking at the scientific literature in terms of the growing evidence base, in terms of the yoga. And I remember seeing a session at a conference from a woman who was very, very visible at the time in the press. She runs BioViva, and she was her own patient zero, taking her own gene therapy to stay healthy.
I've read about her. What is her name?
Her name is Liz Parrish. So I was at a Wired Health event, and she ran the session. And I was quite intrigued by what she was doing. She was her own patient zero in terms of trying to. At the time, she was talking about how the therapy that she was taking was helping to lengthen her telomeres at a cellular level, which I don't want to get into the detail, but it's a sign that you're sort of attacking the aging process, and you're being.
These are the caps that go over your DNA.
They're like the caplets on your shoelaces. And so I was intrigued by what she was doing, but at the same time, when I was doing this project in yoga, I remember stumbling around some papers saying, oh, well, you can lengthen, there's this research showing that you can lengthen your telomeres through exercise and through yoga in particular. So what it struck me was that actually, your physical activity obviously had an impact at a cellular level. And I studied genetics, a long, long, long time ago. And so that kind of stuck with me. And then, of course, fast forward, 2-3 years, when I started to get really involved in aging and longevity, and of course, getting really immersed on the science of aging, it sort of stuck with me. And because there's so much investment going into biotech, like sort of the miracle cures, a miracle pill potentially to cure aging. Whereas in fact, there's a lot that we can do in our lifestyle that will have impact as well. So that was interesting, that experience, just even from in the early days of setting up Collider Health. Of course, I started many more sort of projects, and one thing led to another. And I don't want to go through all the detail of this, but through serendipity and meeting various sort of individuals, I started to catch wind of other opportunities. And I would often invest in sort of taking the punt on sort of niches or areas that I thought weren't being looked into in enough detail by.
What do you mean financially? You would invest in
my time, yes, and sort of investing in sort of making, doing events, for example. So one of the things that I did, and working with one of my dear friends, Eric Kilstrom, is that we did a big event on the future of health and care and looking at the role of data in that. And this is about 3 years ago. We pulled together a big event involving all sorts of stakeholders, from government, the SME sector, public health, the NHS, and all sorts of different stakeholders looking at what the future could hold in terms of leveraging data and digital technologies. And with that, and through having involved some people in those sort of discussions, you make those sort of connections. And then before I knew it, I started to work with the Academic Health Science Network on a big project in AI and data. And that was through having met Melissa Ream, my co-author on the book, which we'll probably come on to a bit later.
We might talk a bit about your book, maybe.
So Melissa and Eric were both really, really important in my whole sort of journey. And I mentioned those two individuals. And in fact, they're in my foreword in the book, because if I hadn't met them, and if I hadn't that serendipity, and I'm a real believer in that sort of fate and serendipity, I wouldn't have had a lot of those opportunities. And of course, you have to kind of, I'm very, very driven by opportunities, and I go for the opportunities, and I make things, I create my own opportunities as well, but they're often through people. So Eric and Melissa are two examples of that, where I developed a relationship. They were obviously working on other things. Everything sort of came together in different ways. And then, it's a stepping stone. And then suddenly you find that you're getting involved in their projects or whatever it might be. So Melissa Reen, so I met her at a conference. I actually, she was aware of the work that I was doing with Eric. And then she had just come across and was invited to get involved in a big project looking at AI in health and care within the Academic Health Science Network. And so she asked whether I might be able to help her with that. So of course I jumped at the chance. And that particular project sort of set me up to get really involved in the world of AI. It was my first foray. And of course, at that time, 3 years ago, it was all very, very new for many, many people. We had a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of really interesting sort of tech startups. But in terms of really understanding what the impact would be in the health and care system, is extremely early days. So
that's the thing, isn't it? You come in and you make the architecture. You start connecting the dots for collaboration. And just to address the APPG for longevity, because that's why I had you on a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
If you can take us there, how many professionals did you have on it? Scientists, politicians, all kinds of innovators to actually look at increasing healthy life expectancy here in the UK.
Yeah, so that, so the APPG, which was started in March 2019, now involves, well over 100 sort of experts, covering science, genomics, business community, the NHS, public sector, and behavioral change experts, and of course many organizations like the King's Fund, Health Foundation, Centre for Aging Better, well over 50 organizations. And so the reason why we started the APPG, so that comes back to the work that I was doing actually by Eric Kilstrom, who at the time, this is again 3 years ago now, but it just shows you the sort of the process that one goes through to create those opportunities. So Eric was the interim challenge director for the Healthy Aging Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. And at the time, they were looking...
Which is, a lot of people won't know. A lot of people who've been listening to my specials on seed oils and the microbiome, they won't know what that is. That's a government initiative.
It's a government initiative, and what's really interesting about that is that it's very, it's unlike any in the world. In fact, many countries around the world are looking at actually how we've gone about it. But the industrial strategy, which was launched in 2017, actually in Theresa May's government, they had four key areas that they looked at to see where Britain could lead in the world. So AI and data was one stream, mobility was the next, clean energy was the third, and then the aging society was the fourth strand. So there's a lot of government attention, a lot of government money going into all these different areas. So I became involved in one aspect, one bucket of the Aging Society Grand Challenge, and that was the healthy aging bucket. So I worked, so Eric, at the time, he invited me, and this is right after we had done this event on the future of data in health and care, where we were meeting all these people. He invited me to help him build up the ecosystem of what at the time people were calling the unusual suspects. So those big companies who may not necessarily be the ones to go after grant money, with Innovate UK, but are the ones that we really needed to take and involve in big transformative collaborative ventures for this pot of money that was really around seeding this marketplace, which didn't exist yet, in products and services to keep us healthy and well. So I started working with Eric, and it struck me that while there's a lot of investment going into this space, it was all kind of like ad hoc, and there is no real strategy in terms of delivering on the government goal that was attached to the strategy, which was the 5 extra years of healthy life expectancy while minimizing health inequalities. So HLE plus 5 is the shorthand.
And the goal is by 2035.
Exactly.
That's it in one, what the overall mission of the APPG for longevity is.
Exactly. So Theresa May set this goal. There's a lot of money being invested into this space, a lot of interest, but there is no real strategy. How are we actually going to really achieve that goal? And what is the role of the business community in that? So with that, that is how, and that became the galvanizing, kind of mobilizing vision and mission for the APPG is let's design the strategy and let's work it out. So with that, we formed the APPG because we know government, of course, is critical and actually in this whole sort of ecosystem, working with the business community, working with public sector. And so APPG became like the vehicle for change in a sense, to be able to look at the strategy. And that's how we set about the task. So very, very quickly, of course, we had then Damien Green, he's the chair of the APPG, and of course, Lord Phil.
Member of Parliament, yes, and former minister.
Green, who of course was the Deputy Prime Minister at the time that the initial HLE+5 goal was set.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there because we could go through the whole roster, but I want to zoom forward. I want to take us forward to the launch in February, almost a year ago, a few weeks before COVID hit, of the health of the nation. In that bucket, you came up with that strategy, and then COVID hit. And I just want to push you forward to get your thoughts and a progress report.
Yeah, and Susan, you will know very full well because you were very involved in working with us to launch the Health of the Nation strategy. And of course, we had a big day right before COVID hit when we launched the strategy with Matt Hancock there. And of course, he was very supportive of everything that we were doing.
Matt Hancock, for anyone who's listening in the United States or in Jordan or anywhere, he is the Minister of Health and Social Care here in the UK.
That's right, absolutely. And I remember at the time, and you may remember this, Susan, I had just come back from Singapore because actually Singapore, I had been invited to talk about the work of the APPG as part of the National Association of Medicine Grand Challenge Roadmap and Healthy Aging. And so we were already starting to get quite a lot of interest from abroad in terms of what we were doing with the APPG. But what we realized and what was really interesting was the recommendations, and we had about 9 core recommendations that came out in Health and Nation strategy. We realized once we started seeing the data come through of who was actually at most risk and who were dying from COVID, it made us realize the recommendations were even more urgent. So that was interesting. So of course, government and of course the NHS were sort of heads down, getting to grip with this crisis. And indeed, we're just coming out of it now a year later. We decided that there are 2 particular recommendations that we should really focus on because we could and we should. So the initial focus very soon was to look at the role of business. So we had one recommendation, the Business Coalition, that we wanted to look at because business has a huge role to play in health, and they have 4 key roles. Obviously, as an employer, they have to look after their employees, and we can see through COVID, boy, how important that was. And then, of course, they have a very critical role as an investor and also as an innovator of products and services, and of course, as a buyer, and of course, as an advertiser connected with their role as a producer of products and services, because advertising is actually a really important part of the story, which of course we're seeing now in terms of initiatives to limit advertising of junk food and all these sorts of things, because coming out of COVID, people, for some, and for your international viewers, of course, our Prime Minister had a very close call with COVID, and he puts it down to being overweight. Obesity is a massive, massive risk factor, as we've seen from the data.
Absolutely. But just getting back to the Business Coalition, if you could just give me in a nutshell what you've done, what progress you've made.
Yes. So in May, so this is 3 months, just after the height of the first lockdown period when we had most of the deaths, we ran a series of roundtables asking the business community what we should do. And of course, it was a very, very heightened emotional time. Sainsbury's and all the supermarkets were prioritizing all their deliveries to vulnerable communities and all that sort of stuff. And we could see a lot of businesses rising up to the challenge, I guess, in terms of what they could do to help in this national effort. So we asked this community, what should we do? And so what came out is quite a clear consensus that we needed some mechanism whereby we could measure the contribution of business to the nation's health. The other clear idea that came out is that we should see this in a way that we are currently, there's a lot of parallels with the climate change agenda. We're kind of like 10 years behind the climate change agenda when we knew that we had to do something pretty spectacular as an effort, as a massive effort. And of course, the climate change space in terms of business, I mean, a lot of businesses are now obviously heavily guided by ESG mandates, not investing in coal and dirty energy and all that sort of stuff. Well, we need to see the same approach happening in the health space. We need to make sure that business is not contributing to negative health and that they should really do more and more to contribute positively to health. So there are a lot of parallels with that. So
no, absolutely. They're so aligned. There is a need for businesses as well to be able to put their hand up and say, we've achieved this. This is our environmental profile. This is what we're doing for health and well-being. So what have you proposed so that businesses can reach for something tangible?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing we needed to do was to form form the entity. I mean, what are we going to do, and what is that going to look like? So we did it. We had a bit of a scoping exercise with those who were very involved in the May roundtables. We had about 300 businesses and organizations sign up to that. So really struck by the enthusiasm. But we realized, and what we did is that we launched Business for Health as a social enterprise in November. So quite quick. And of course, with that, and this is my social entrepreneur hat, with everything that I do, and I know, Susan, you will understand this, well, how are we going to run this thing? Because already I was investing in, very heavily in a lot of the activities, myself and as Collider Health and all the rest of it. And with the Social Enterprise Longevity International, how are we going to do this thing? We need funding. We need to kind of, get a team together, all these sorts of things. So the summer months were spent pulling together who our funders might be and how we could underwrite it and who our supporters were going to be. And very, very quickly, we managed to get that core base level funding for year one. Our supporters, so people like Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, and of course, Matt Hancock, gave his full sort of support behind the business venture. So we were lining up all of our key stakeholders. But then we formed the group. We have and of course, this is all on the website now, our founding partners, and they are AXA Health, the Phoenix Group, Legal and General, and of course, John Godfrey is the Corporate Affairs Director of Legal and General, is very involved in the APPG. So you've got
some heavyweights supporting you. Is there anything that we can, that I can tell John and Jill, were the pubs open? Oh, they just did this. This is happening.
So what's happening is that we've now are forming a working group to develop the business index. So we've been speaking to a lot of people, working out who needs to be involved. So this is all very fast and furious. I mean, we only literally became an organization in November, but already we've got a plan for the business index. We're already forming our working group. We have a plan to have the first roundtables, in April, after we do a bit of research needed to look at all the other indices in the marketplace at the moment.
Is it 10 going to be, you're doing really well? What will it look like?
What will it look like? I think it will take any number of forms, actually. I think a multi-dimensional index that would sort of benchmark every single company under the sun. I think that's an enormous amount of work, which will take years to do. I think probably, and what I think is more interesting and what will motivate businesses to participate in this, is something that will help businesses move from A to B in terms of really understanding how they can contribute positively to health. So that will be on a number of different parameters. The most obvious one is in terms of health and well-being with their employees. There's a lot of work already that's taking place. Of course, many big businesses invest heavily in their health and well-being programs. What's more of a gap is actually the effectiveness of these schemes and the behavioral change that you need to see with these schemes. So we're going to do a bit of work around that, really understanding what is it that will convince the finance director of companies to invest in their health and well-being programs, and how to measure it. So that measurement piece, and of course that will be very data-driven, is core to this. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, of course, is the wider piece around the long-term change that we want to see, which is more around the innovation investment piece, which is, again, taking a leaf out of the climate change experience, why it is beneficial to business to actually really care about their role in people's health, because in the end, it's better business and it will lead to commercial returns. But I think post-COVID, I think there's an increasing awareness of this whole kind of new stakeholder model, anyway, that the World Economic Forum often talks about. Business has a really important role to play. It's not just the role of NHS or government, in the nation's health. We all have a role to play.
So absolutely. It's private-public partnerships. Absolutely. And I guess with businesses too, you give them something to gun for, something to hold up, put on their website. We've just got a gold designation on the business index, which is great, because as we know, things are precarious, things are uncertain. Once furlough ends, I mean, who knows which viable jobs will remain, which sectors will be hardest hit. I mean, so it's all up in the air. So very uncertain times for everyone, and for businesses trying to stay afloat and play into that ESG agenda.
Absolutely. No, these are really, really important. So, we've had a huge level of interest. I think the business community are completely aware that they have a greater role to play than I think most people will ever realize, but it took COVID to really show that. So I think there are some silver linings with COVID, despite how horrendous it's been for so many people, and obviously, deaths, which is horrific.
No, it's just awful. Now, I want to also move you on, and then we're going to stop talking about the APPG for longevity. So short answers so we can talk about your book. you also, the second recommendation, the second entity that you've set up is let me get the title right, the Open Life Data Task Group. And that was born from the Health of the Nation as well. What's happening with that?
So we're doing a lot of work with that. So we formed the task group last year, coming out of the summer when things were still looking a bit rosier with COVID and all the rest of it at that point. And we thought, right, let's start cracking on with this group. Partly driven because at the time there was a consultation process underway on the national data strategy, and there's a lot of talk at the time about harnessing our public sector data sets better and really seeing data as a new oil. It's the most valuable resource in the world, and UK PLC needs to make more of our data. So we had a bit of a deadline because the consultation was going to close in December. But what we really wanted to do was to look at how we can look at data in a different way. So we know that there's a lot of attention on data that we have in our medical health records, and of course, but that there's been a lot of talk in the press about how the NHS data set, this longitudinal data set, is the most valuable asset of the NHS that we shouldn't squander and protect. But that most people don't realize this. That represents the care that you get in hospitals and obviously your GPs, and when you get ill, that's only 10 to 15% of the determinants of your health. So there's a lot of determinants that are outside the healthcare system that really need more attention. So that's the data that exists. And of course, big tech will know this. It's the data exhaust, it's all the data that we generate in our lives. It's our purchasing, what we're buying in supermarkets. It's how we move. The rate at which we walk, is very, very telling actually of our future.
Yes. Gait speed.
Of how healthy we'll be, at the 45, that's like a really, really good indication is how fast you walk as to what your healthy lifespan is going to be. So there's all this data outside the system. And of course, that environmental data is really, really important. So we wanted to create a framework where we could put more of a spotlight on that non-health data for health, the 85% of that data that exists, which are much more linked to our social and wider determinants of health, and try and link that up in a framework where we could really look at the possibilities, which we have looked at and taken a lesson from other sectors like open banking, which was born out of this recognition that it was driven by a couple of legislative developments like GDPR and PTS2, which were all about data portability, so that consumers, they can take their data wherever they want, from their banking records. It's not owned by the banks. So we're taking some of that thinking. So it's data on our health, it's our medical records. And, we've got this grip on data, that currently exists in the system. How do we open up that system that will drive more innovation in the startup world, which is really important, but also make it more easy for us to make use of that data as an individual. So
you'll be compiling it, and you'll be building some structures and some apps, dare I say it, so that the general public can actually take part in this in a practical way.
We hope that the outcome of this will be a greater availability of all those tools and technologies, and not just necessarily apps. It's any service or business that needs to make use of data to understand the person better and to put that back into the feedback to develop better products and services, to plan better housing, smart technologies, or whatever it might be. But what will come out of this, because we're looking very specifically at what are the big problems and what are the big use cases that we should be focusing on, and how we can enable a mechanism for data sharing that will allow this to happen. Because, the power of AI, and of course, that's what I talk a lot about in my book, is being able to harness the patterns and cross data sets, which will enable us to really understand at an individual level how we can keep healthy and well, but also at a population health level, what we can do to also deliver better health for the nation. So it's all these ideas that we're sort of taking into this process. And by the end of it, hopefully by September, we'll have almost like a roadmap, how we do this in a way that takes lessons from open banking, which totally opened up the fintech industry and has allowed much more kind of consumer-oriented solutions. Well, why don't we take some of that thinking into the health space? I mean, it's much, healthcare data is in many ways more complex, but actually there are many parallels too that we can take from what's been happening in other sectors.
Absolutely. And you're pulling all that together. So now we are going to introduce your book. It is called Live Longer with AI, How Artificial Intelligence is Helping Us Extend Our Health Span and Live Better Too. I love this book. I won't say I've read every page, but when it first came out, of course, I did a review after I read most pages. And it's It's riveting. It's really impressive, Tina. Talk about taking your shot and scoring. Tell us how you came to write this book.
I would never have imagined in a million years that I will have written a book. I mean, honestly, it was a complete shock. So the story is, and this was now 2 years ago, I was approached on LinkedIn by a publisher saying, "Oh, we were wondering whether you'd like to write a book on AI and healthcare." And I just thought, oh gosh, it's just, you get endless LinkedIn requests, and I just sort of I wasn't really serious about it. But then I was sitting in bed, as one does on a Saturday evening, checking my LinkedIns, writing a few messages, saw this, and then said, well, I'm actually kind of busy right now. What were you thinking? It was quite flippant in my response.
I was working with you. I remember you were full tilt, full on, so maxed out. Exactly. And when you told me, oh, yes, and by the way, I think I'm going to write this, I went, what?
So I wrote this message back, and then I got the message back, and then I realized it was a pretty major international tech publisher called PAC. And I thought, oh my goodness, how the hell did they find me? And this is why I refer to Eric and Melissa, because, and I'm really grateful to the people who have given me opportunities, and obviously, I've made the best of those opportunities, but I wouldn't have been found. It was an algorithm, clearly, because they were obviously checking out who was active in the space. I had obviously been doing all this work in the academic health science networks with healthy aging. This is where Melissa and Eric come through, and published that big report, and was doing a lot of articles, and it was that was the reason why they found me. And so I wrote back and said, well, yes, I'm interested, but can I do a book not about healthcare? Can I do it about health, because of my interest in preventative health? And of course, I was really just about to launch the Health of the Nation with you and all the rest of it. And within a week, we had signed the contract. And it was just quite extraordinary how fast it all happened. And I just remember that 1 week. It was just an extraordinary week. I had my first article in Forbes published all around genomics and longevity. I've been invited to number 10 for a breakfast meeting with Matt Hancock, our Secretary of State. And then I was approached by this book publisher. So obviously something was working. There was something in the stars aligning to sort of, So
you took your shot and you were getting the dividend.
And we went about this book, and obviously it was tough because I was humongously busy. But a lot of the book is, as you know, Susan, is through my interviews with amazing people who I've been meeting and thanking, and so grateful for all the work that they're doing. And so that was.
Well, let's just tell people that might have an interest in buying your book and learning from it. 30 pioneers in genomics, AI, and longevity. I mean, it's a real mixed bag of interesting innovators and game changers in the really artificial intelligence space.
It's a huge array of incredible people. I mean, people like Aubrey de Grey, who, of course, is very, very well known for his work in the hot end of longevity research, the hallmarks of aging. Sergey Young, who's a very serious investor in the space and is quite a philanthropist too, and he's very involved with the Exponential X Prize, at Singularity University, looking at longevity. Andrew Scott, who wrote The 100-Year Life, and his other book out.
And Nir Barzilai. You're talking about all the people I've interviewed on the Big Middle.
Nir Barzilai,
yeah, absolutely.
It was wonderful, who I met actually in New York for the interview. And he was the one who turned me on to intermittent fasting, because he was telling me about how they stumbled upon this finding that it wasn't actually the reduction of calories per se, but it was actually the intervals between the eating of mice, in the laboratory, that was actually the key for them living longer. So then he was he had just come off his fast to eat some sushi with me, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then so I now do intermittent fasting, and I know, Susan, you know all about this.
Well, I do it as well. I've been doing it for 5 years.
You have been doing so many really interesting podcasts around this whole area that is opening up around diets and microbiome and all these sorts of things. I mean, it is so big right now. And of course, there's a lot of them in the book, because the pace of science now, and of course, AI has a huge role to play. It is absolutely mind-boggling. So I have an interest in and I write about this in the book, around this exposome concept. So what are all the things in our environment, what we eat, what we do, the stresses that we're under, how, and pollution, all these sort of things, how they affect us inside. So that concept of biological age, your innate health status, what you can do to keep yourself, I guess, healthy. And of course, hopefully your biological age is not older than your chronological age if you're really unhealthy. So that's really, really fascinating. And that's being driven by the science at the moment.
No, absolutely. And it's what I'm dipping into as well, because running alongside COVID, it's become so important to look at this secondary pandemic that we've got, this metabolic syndrome, cardiometabolic sickness, and to realize the diseases of civilization. Lifestyle diseases that's in our power to change 80% of our personal outcomes. We can no longer just say, oh, well, my mom had this and I had that. Yes, genetics for some people is a big factor, but for most of us, we can control how healthy we feel for longer.
Absolutely. And I think, even with and of course, Tim Spector, and I know, his work very, very well. He's done these most incredible twin studies, and of course, all the research, and even through the twin studies, show that if you've got identical twins who follow a different diet and the microbiome is different, they will have radically different responses to diets, for example. And it's understanding all that. It's quite fascinating, the interactions at so many different levels in our body and our reaction to the environment, how that will play out, what in the end our sort of whole process of aging and how healthy we are and all the rest of it.
Yeah, Tim Spector's work it's eternally fascinating. And I just can't wait until they crack it and they can put the skinny bacteria in a capsule. for those of us that are more estrogenic and, curvy women that find shifting weight really hard. I just can't wait. They do say that they did try and it's just not happening. But yeah, microbiome, all of that. And this is the thing, because COVID has really thrown a light on the fracture lines of society. And why did we have so many deaths? Because we're not a healthy populace. We just aren't in the UK.
Yeah. So that is our biggest problem. And that is one of the main, of course, we're quite a crowded nation, which also has a lot to do with why, the COVID has been more difficult. When you compare it to New Zealand, for example, that is also not particularly healthy, but they have a lot more space between people. So, but I think, clearly that is a huge factor. So that's a big part of what we're doing at the APPG now, is to raise attention on the importance of prevention. We had a piece published in the Lancet right before Christmas, on our unhealthy nation. So we're looking at, how can we focus more on keeping healthy and well? So I think there are a few things on our side. I think people coming out of the COVID experience are realizing how important our health is. So I think our health is our greatest asset. We must protect it. I think, it's now we have to really turn to what we can do to invest more in prevention. We still think about health investment in terms of building more hospitals. I think that has to change. We have to invest more in our health prevention. But that, of course, is where the business community has a huge role to play, to make sure that big money that is looking for really smart, socially responsible investments are going into that space, which often has very long time horizons before you get the return. So these are all the things that we're looking at. And of course, a big part of it is we need to be looking after ourselves better and armed with the information and armed with the tools and technologies and ways to incentivize us and to nudge us. We have a huge role to play too. Notwithstanding, there are a lot of factors that we also have to understand. There's digital literacy. There's all the very, very naughty issues around, what is it that keeps people trapped in ill health? And we have to say it is completely linked with our inequalities as a society, unfortunately. And those are the more difficult things to solve. But of course, government are obviously looking at that very, very closely now in terms of the leveling up agenda. COVID is, I think, in some ways, it's been a painful lesson, but I think it is starting to make us focus on things that we know and have known for a long time need to change.
Then we can start connecting the dots even more, getting some more depth and some momentum going on all of these issues. Once the landscape settles a little bit and the vaccines are rolled out even more, and we can put it in our rearview mirror, hopefully, and manage it like the measles, which is sort of the latest thinking on how we might wrestle this beast to the ground. I want to circle back to the personal you, Tina. Having worked with you, you go 90 miles an hour. Your own health and well-being. I know you intermittent fast now, and you exercise is really important. But have you reflected on your own lifestyle and made some tweaks?
Yeah, such a good question. I do work too hard. I'm driven. There's something in me that drives me, obviously, to the ridiculous extremes that I go to do things. And, I'm so passionate about what I do. But I mean, I try and look after myself. It's very good that I have a husband who does remind me that actually it's not a good thing to be stuck behind your laptop, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. So he will literally drag me away, make sure that I do a long walk on a Sunday with him for a start. I must remember I've got 2 sons still at home, which has been wonderful to make sure that I don't forget the fact that I've got family and friends who also are really important parts of my life. And of course, I am very conscious of my health. So the one thing that I haven't given up, even though, I'm way too busy at the moment. I mean, it's completely ridiculous at the moment how much work I've got on at the moment. I mean, I'm loving it, but the one thing that I have not let go, I force myself, it's a non-negotiable. I make sure that I get my run every day, my little bit of rowing machine and my old rowing machine down in the cellar, and my yoga. So it takes about an hour, and that is so important. And I know if I can't do that, then I'm in real trouble. So, there are a few things that I really try and focus on, because I know more than anything, the only reason, or one of the big reasons, or there's a couple of reasons why I'm able to work at the pace that I do, or the rate, is because I'm really healthy. Like, I've got lots of energy. And if I didn't have my health, I couldn't do half of what I do. So that's really important. But also the love of my family and my dear husband putting up with this ridiculous schedule that I keep. I mean, that's also really, really important. And of course, my friends. So, those are really, really important.
Well, I've met your husband. I'm really glad that he's doing his bit to pull you out of the chair, get you out of the attic and away from the screens, because it's so important. And, as we try to recalibrate everything, I think we've all had a word with ourselves about the lifestyle that we're living and realized health, as is often said, I mean, it's all become a cliche. Health is our wealth and all the rest. But in general, finding the balance, finding the moments in the day where you're away from a screen and your internal dialogue, you've managed to calm it, to mute it, and just be a little bit without constantly grasping at the next goal.
Yeah, I think yoga has been really helpful. And I think, I've set myself the task, because of this whole COVID thing, I thought, what? We're in these various periods of lockdown. Obviously, we've been quite heavily restricted. I thought, thank goodness I'm lucky enough to have lots to do and things that I'm really passionate about. That has been a huge gift that I've had, in terms of just being able to manage, with COVID. So I will say, I mean, once we are out of this period, the one thing I will do is I will make sure that I'm going to take a really long holiday and try and work a little bit less once we're able to go out and just be normal again.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. A less frenetic pace for Tina. And are you actually, sometimes when we talked, when I was head of comms at APPG, I think, oh my God, you didn't sleep at all, did you? And you would say, no, I didn't. So are you managing to get some sleep, proper sleep?
Well, that's a good question. So the one thing that I would say is it's a little bit all over the place, because the one thing I have is I've just got this mind full of, it's always racing. I've always got so many things to do. And so it's either, getting relaxed enough to fall asleep, or indeed what often happens is I'll wake up and I've just got a gazillion things in my mind, just from, telling me, oh, you've got to remember to do this, that, and the other. So that does happen. And I do have my nights where my sleep hasn't been great. But, I kind of manage, I'm not addicted to sleeping pills or anything like that. So I manage, just to kind of wrestle with it and hope that all the things that keep me healthy, and the fact that I'm, energized by my work and keep my brain very active, these will temper, I guess the negatives are not getting enough sleep. Because of course they always tell you if you get too little sleep, that's a risk factor for dementia. And of course, that's the most terrifying thing for me, if, is
absolutely
ever having that disease. But I try not to worry about it too much, because I think that's also part of it. If you worry too much, then you won't sleep.
Tina Woods, social entrepreneur, health innovation pioneer, connecting science, government, business, and academia, all the innovators, all the game changers, to act as one to make real change. I can't thank you enough for making the time in your busy schedule to come on The Big Middle again.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for all the work that you do, because it's so important to kind of spread the message about what we can all do to keep healthier for longer. So thanks, Susan, and I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely, when this lockdown ends. Now, Tina Woods, just to remind you, she's the founder of Collider Health and Collider Science, co-founder of Longevity International, which runs the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity. It's always a mouthful, that. Her book is Live Longer with AI, How Artificial Intelligence is Helping Us Extend Our Health Spans and Live Better Too. You can get your copy via the link that I have put in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye, Tina.
Bye, Susan. Thanks so much.